nature cannot possess moral agency. The contrary is far more compatible with Darwin's theory. A highly diverse natural living world can accommodate the kind of animal that has the capacity for moral responsibility and choice. After all, among all the living things on Earth, among all the different species, there are enormous differences already, quite apart from human beings. I mean, a fish is very different from a bird. A whale is very different from a mouse. So clearly in the natural world, independently of any talk of divine intervention or intelligent design or anything, one makes perfectly good accommodation of the fact that there are differences, that animals differ from one another in a significant way, and that these differences remain fairly stable over quite lengthy periods of time. Yes, there is evolution, but there's also stability. A seahorse, for example, is very different from a puma, yet both are subject to Darwinian evolutionary laws. Why then would it not be possible for human beings to have emerged from a process governed by those same general laws, with attributes and capacities that are very different from those other animals possess? Their capacity for making original choices, for free will and moral responsibility, could be as much a part of the natural order as the male seahorse's capacity to carry the young, unlike other animals when it is usually the female that does this. Not only do environmentalists talk about the health of the ecosystem, but both animal rights advocates and environmentalists implore human beings to conduct themselves properly, to live up to standards of morality. In fact, that's a big theme of Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, that this is a moral issue. Now, if you're going to call it a moral issue, that has certain implications. It means that human beings are subject to the moral law. Notice that most animal rights activists, defenders, animal liberationists do not go out there and preach to animals. They don't implore the lion to be kinder to the zebra as he devours the zebra. I don't know of any animal rights or animal liberation advocates who accord to animals the kind of moral responsibility that they do to human beings. In claiming that animals have rights, they imply that human beings have the responsibility to respect and protect those rights. They don't do the same thing with other animals. They don't go to animals and claim that they need to respect the rights of other animals. There is no such talk in the animal rights movement, which suggests very strongly that within that movement itself, and then more generally the environmentalist movement, there is an acknowledgement that human beings are different from the rest of the animal world, and that their difference consists mainly in having moral agency. That is to say, in having the capacity to do both right and wrong, and the responsibility to do the former. This is something they do not ascribe to animals. Now, some people maintain that only shows that, well, animals may not have moral agency, but they could be moral patients. In other words, they could be subjects of moral concern, and there is nothing in what I have argued that denies that. But then, of course, a painting can have the same status as being subject to moral concerns. If you were to go and cut up the Mona Lisa, you would be performing something deplorable, morally, quite obscene, and yet nobody wants to argue that the Mona Lisa, the painting, has any rights. It just happens to be the kind of valuable object that imposes certain responsibilities on human beings to treat it in a certain sort of fashion and with care and consideration. And so the fact of something's status as a moral patient does not seem to suggest at all that it has any rights. It may have certain implications for how we ought to deal with those kinds of things and what our moral responsibilities are. But rights talk is only a very small portion of the moral universe. Even in our own lives, when we relate to our parents, our lovers, our friends, our neighbors, we very rarely bring up rights. Quite a lot more do we talk about responsibilities and considerations and having certain ways of treating people because of what they deserve, not because of their rights. If you, for example, treat somebody near you disregarding his or her accomplishments and you are considered to be a callous human being, that doesn't have anything to do with rights. It has to do with certain standards of proper conduct that you're neglecting. So, again, it is moral agency that gives rise to the phenomena of rights in a community, because there is the only place where other beings, other humans, have the capacity to choose to intrude upon you. The rest of nature has no such choice. If a mosquito attacks you, it may be deadly even, but it's not a violation of your rights, because a mosquito doesn't have the choice to respect your agency, your independence, your liberty. It just acts as it must by virtue of its hard wiring. Human beings, on the other hand, who burglarize you or kidnap you or assault you, are open to moral criticism because they could have done otherwise. They were free not to do the intrusive thing that they did. In fact, this is generally the case with almost all historical assessment of our past and our elders. We look at what they did and we ask ourselves, could they have done better? Could the masters of the slaves in the American South have avoided becoming such masters? Could the Nazis have avoided being killers? Could the Mussolini's thugs avoided being the fascist brutes that they were? We're talking about human beings who have acted in certain ways, which some of us consider to be wrong, and one of the reasons we blame them is that we conceive of them as having the capacity to have chosen to do what is right, but they didn't do it. This doesn't seem to apply anywhere in the animal world. Although we might chide our dog for pooping in the middle of the living room, it's not a moral issue. It's more an issue of training, of wishing to have the dog behave differently. And yes, there is a certain area of ambiguity when it comes to pets, because pets are those animals who have been so incorporated into the human way of living that it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish between the human part of them and the animal part of them. People have pet cemeteries. In Hollywood, there have major, funerals for pets, and we give names to pets, which is very close to what we do with human beings. We give them names. We treat them as individuals rather than simply members of a class. But it's arguable that this is all a little bit of a fantasy life that we live with our pets, because they kind of behave like